I'm just a background noise in this family. I stood at the sink, hands in lukewarm dishwater, staring at the same crack in the tile that had been there since I was 10. My twin brother Kyle was on the couch laughing with our mother, like he always did, as if nothing in this world had ever gone wrong. And if it had, it wasn't his fault. Never his. Kevin, are you done with the dishes yet? Mom didn't look up from her phone. Kyle's waiting for his dinner. I nodded even though she wasn't looking. She never did. I dried my hands and walked over to the kitchen, quietly plating the food I had cooked. No thank you, no eye contact. Kyle didn't even stop scrolling his feed. Just grabbed the plate, muttered something like finally, and turned the TV volume up. They always made me feel like I was late, even when I was the only one doing anything at all. Dinner was always the same. They talked, I listened. When I tried to speak, my voice felt like a pebble dropped in a storm, lost before it could even reach the surface. Tonight, Kyle was bragging about some girl from class. Mom laughed and said, "That's my boy, always the charmer." I sipped water. Then Kyle turned to me. "You still working at that coffee shop? What do you even do there? Sweep floors." Mom chuckled. "He's good with brooms, I'll give him that." I smiled small and tight, like I was watching someone else be mocked. They weren't joking. Not really. Jokes require some affection. I looked down at my lap and remembered the drawing I kept under my mattress, the one I made when I was 10. It was me and Kyle holding hands under a sun that smiled. Above it in shaky crayon, "I'll be better." I had meant it then, still did. But sometimes I wonder if you can be better in a family that decided who you are before you could even speak. I think I was around 6 the first time it stung deep enough to stay. It was summer sticky heat, curling up from the sidewalks, the kind that made the apartment feel like a box too small for breathing. Kyle and I had drawn with markers on the inside of a cardboard box. Rockets, dragons, silly faces. We laughed, and I remembered that clearly, the way he looked at me like we were a team. But then he tore the drawing, ripped it straight down the middle, the part where I had drawn us holding hands. I looked at him stunned. I didn't even say anything, just stared. He walked out of the box and called for Mom. "Kevin broke it," he said, without even blinking. "He ruined everything." Mom came in and barely looked at the mess. "Kevin, seriously?" Her voice was flat, tired, disappointed. "Why do you always have to ruin things?" But I didn't. I started holding the ripped paper like it could explain itself. Kyle sniffled, just enough, eyes wide as if hurt. Mom sighed, pulled him close, and whispered something to him. I didn't hear what. Then she turned to me, eyes narrowed. "You need to stop being so jealous of your brother." That was the first time I heard that sentence. It wouldn't be the last. I sat there in the cardboard box for a long time after they left the torn paper in my hands. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I crept into the kitchen, found a crayon, and rewrote the sentence at the top of the picture. "I'll be better." Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, I believed I must have. Isn't that how it begins? Not with screams, but with silence, with the quiet belief that maybe it really is you. Our apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, one always louder than the other. Kyle's room was filled with posters, new sneakers, trophies, and the scent of body spray he used too much of. Mine had peeling wallpaper and a lamp that buzzed when I turned it on. The only decoration was a shelf of second-hand books, and that folded drawing tucked under my mattress. We were twins, but only one of us was allowed to shine. Mom used to tell the story like it was funny how Kyle cried so loudly in the hospital that all the nurses ran to him while I came out silent. Even at birth, he needed the spotlight. She'd laugh, and Kevin was just observing, I guess. She thought it was a cute anecdote, but over time it became a script. Kyle got everything first, not just toys or praise, but belief. If he said something, it was true. If I said something, it was overthinking or too sensitive. He had charisma. I had questions. He had stories. I had doubts. He got space to grow. I got told to wait, to understand, to forgive. And Mom, she wasn't evil. That's the hard part. She loved us, or at least she thought she did. But her love had edges, sharp ones. Kyle was her mirror. Loud, confident, charming. I was a smudge in the corner she didn't want to admit was there. When Dad left, I was too young to remember she said she couldn't raise two boys with equal attention. So she poured everything into Kyle. Her second chance, her golden boy. And me, I became the quiet one. The one who could handle being ignored. The one who didn't need as much. The one who disappeared so no one else had to. Sometimes I wonder if she even knew what that cost. Or maybe she did and just preferred not to ask. I almost left when I was 15. It was winter. Cold enough that the radiator hissed and popped through the night like it was angry to be alive. I remember standing at the door with my shoes half on backpack, strapped tight, fingers frozen around the knob. Kyle had just blamed me for something again, broken headphones I think. He'd stepped on them, I saw it. But when Mom came in, he pointed at me without even thinking. He gets jealous, Mom. He probably did it on purpose. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even look at me. Just shook her head and muttered, "What's wrong with you, Kevin?" Later that night, after the shouting stopped, I packed my bag. I had $28 saved in a Ziploc bag, 2 granola bars, a hoodie, and that drawing, the one I'd crumpled and uncrumpled so many times it was soft like cloth. I opened the door. The wind hit my face like a warning. But then I heard her coughing from the other room. My mom. That dry, rattling cough. She always tried to hide behind tissues and mints. She had this thing, chronic bronchitis, or maybe worse, I never really knew. She'd never let us come to doctor visits. Kyle never paid attention to it, but I did. And I thought of my little brother, not Kyle, not really a brother anymore, but the version of him I remembered. The one who held my hand in that cardboard box. The one who once said, "We'll live together forever." So I closed the door, not because I was scared, not because I didn't want to go, but because someone needed to stay. Someone needed to be the one who didn't add more pain. Someone needed to keep the promises made in silence. The ones whispered in empty rooms. That night I sat in bed and pressed the drawing against my chest. "I'll be better," I whispered. Even if no one noticed. Even if no one asked me to. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just lingers, a quiet echo in everyday things. Like when they'd order food and forget to ask me what I wanted. Or when Mom made 3 eggs and gave 2 to Kyle. 1 to herself and said, "You're fine with cereal," right as she closed the fridge. Or when family photos were updated and mine stayed the same, the school picture from 8th grade, lopsided hair and all. Or when Kyle had friends over, and I'd hear them laugh in the next room while I folded laundry or wiped down the kitchen table. Not because anyone told me to, just because it was easier than pretending I was invited. Once I got an A in literature, a paper the teacher read out loud to the whole class. I came home carrying that paper like a treasure. I left it on the table, circled, grade, face up. Kyle had just come back from basketball tryouts. He said, "Coach said I'm starting next week." Mom clapped, "My boy." My paper was still there when I cleared the dishes. They hadn't noticed. There were no bruises, no broken bones, just space, distance, an invisible wall I was never invited to climb. At night, I'd lie in bed and rehearse conversations that never happened. "Mom, can you listen for once, Kyle? I know what you're doing. I'm not invisible." But in the morning, I'd make the coffee, pack Kyle's protein bars, iron Mom's work blouse. Not because I wanted thanks. I didn't expect them anymore. It was just easier to serve than to argue. Easier to disappear slowly than to break loud. Still, some part of me hoped if I kept showing up, kept being quiet, maybe one day they'd see. Maybe one day someone would ask me how I felt. But that day never came. And eventually, I stopped expecting it. I turned 19 the day they humiliated me in front of everyone. It was Kyle's graduation, his not mine. He had barely passed, but the way Mom acted, you'd think he was valedictorian. She rented a small hall, invited the neighbors, cousins, even old co-workers she barely liked. There were banners, balloons, a cake. That said, to the brightest future. I helped carry the tables, set the chairs, cleaned up the broken centerpiece. No one saw Kyle knock over. I wasn't jealous. At least not at first. I'd gotten used to blending into the walls. But then it happened. Mrs. Daly, the neighbor from down the hall, smiled at me during dinner. "And what about you, Kevin? What are your plans?" Before I could speak, Kyle cut in. "He's working at Java Bean. Living the dream, right, Kev?" A few people chuckled. I tried to laugh too, but it got stuck somewhere in my throat. "I've been saving up for some classes," I said quietly. "Thinking about community college." Kyle leaned back, fake surprised. "Oh, since when?" I looked at Mom. She didn't say anything, just tilted her head like she couldn't quite recognize me. "He says that every year," Kyle added, raising his glass. "We'll believe it when we see it." Everyone laughed. Everyone. I nodded, smiling like I was in on the joke. But something cracked that night. Not because of what they said I'd heard worse, but because it was the first time I realized no one was ever going to stop him. Not Mom, not the guests, not even me. I went to the bathroom and locked the door, sat on the closed lid of the toilet, pulled out my wallet, and stared at the folded drawing. The edges were soft now, the words faint. "I'll be better." I looked at my reflection, pale, under yellow light eyes, tired. Better for who? Some nights I wrote letters I never sent. Not long, not poetic. Just truths I wasn't allowed to say out loud. "Dear Mom, sometimes I wish you had one son instead of two. I think you did too." "Dear Kyle, do you remember when we used to share secrets under the blanket? I do. I don't think you miss me, but I miss who you were." "Dear me, it's okay that they don't understand you. You still exist." I kept them in a folder under my bed, along with the drawing, now folded so many times it felt more like fabric than paper. That single sentence, "I'll be better," was more faded now, but still there. I didn't cry often, not anymore. The tears stopped coming after a certain age, replaced by something quieter. A hollow space where feeling used to be. But sometimes I would hold the drawing and feel something stir, like a tiny voice in a locked room, whispering, "You were never the problem." I remember one night Kyle was out and Mom was asleep on the couch with an empty wine glass. I walked into the living room and just watched her for a while. Her face in sleep looked softer, less angry, less tired. She looked human. And I thought, what happened to you? What happened to us? But I didn't feel hate. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to be free from needing her to love me differently. That night, I journaled until the sun came up. Not about them, about me. I wrote about how I liked reading poetry, even if no one ever asked. About how I memorized train schedules, because I liked knowing something in this city ran on time. About how I sometimes imagine another version of me living somewhere else with soft sheets and no one shouting his name. I didn't know who that Kevin was yet, but I wanted to meet him someday. It was a Tuesday when I lost the last thing that felt like home. I came back from a shift at the coffee shop, 12 hours on my feet, short-staffed again, to find my room different. Kyle had borrowed my desk chair, again. Clothes on the floor. Someone had eaten the granola bars I kept hidden behind the books. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the crumpled drawing wasn't there. I checked the mattress, the pillowcase, the back of the bookshelf. Nothing. Panic set in, but quietly, the kind that squeezes your ribs instead of your throat. I walked to the kitchen, heart thudding. "Hey," I asked Kyle, voice low. "Did you touch the stuff under my bed?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "What stuff?" There was a drawing. It was important. He raised an eyebrow. You mean that sad little paper you always stare at? I didn't answer. Oh, he said, smirking. I thought it was trash. It had food stains on it or something. I threw it out yesterday. My ears rang. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, not blinking. Then I walked to the trash, empty, taken out. That piece of paper had lasted 15 years. It had survived every winter, every slammed door, every time I almost gave up. And just like that, it was gone. Mom came out of her room, saw me near the bin. Why are you making a mess? I didn't answer her either. I went back to my room and sat on the floor, hands shaking, chest tight. But I didn't cry. Instead, I picked up a pen and wrote 3 words on a scrap of receipt. I am enough. I folded it smaller and smaller until it fit in my palm. Not a replacement, just something to hold on to. The drawing was gone. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need it anymore. I left without a sound. No shouting, no notes, no slamming of doors. Just silence, the same silence they gave me for years. It was early. The sun was still dragging itself up over the skyline. The kind of blue-gray morning where even New York feels quiet. I packed light 2 shirts, the worn hoodie, my wallet, a copy of Rilke's letters, and that folded receipt I am enough pressed between pages like a bookmark I wasn't ready to forget. I stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the door to Mom's room. The way the light from the windows spilled under it. I thought maybe she'd wake up and say something, anything. But the apartment stayed quiet. Kyle was passed out on the couch, one arm over his eyes, mouth slightly open. A bottle of something expensive near his hand. A gift from someone who probably thought he was brilliant. I looked at him one last time. Not with hate, not even with sadness, just with distance. We had shared everything once, a room, a face, a laugh. But that boy I remembered no longer existed. Maybe he never really did. The hallway felt longer than usual as I stepped through it. The floor creaked in the same places it always did. And as I opened the front door, I didn't look back. Because I knew if I did, I might hesitate. And this time, I couldn't afford to. Outside, the city exhaled sirens in the distance. A dog barking, a woman yelling into her phone about coffee. But for the first time in years, the noise didn't hurt. It felt like space, like breath. I walked to the end of the block before I paused. Took out my phone. No messages. No missed calls. No one knew I was gone. And somehow that felt like permission. It's been 3 years since I left. I live in a shared apartment now. Quiet, nothing fancy. Just 2 roommates who mind their own business. And a window that lets in good light. I've taken some classes. I write a lot. Nothing published, but that's not the point. The point is that the words are mine. Some mornings I still wake up thinking I hear Kyle's voice. That sharp tone, the smirk behind the sentence. But it fades. Less like a wound now. More like a weathered scar. I haven't spoken to my mother since I left. No calls, no emails. Once a letter arrived, from her, a single page. She didn't say sorry. She just asked where I'd gone. I didn't respond. Not because I hate her, I don't. I think that's what surprises people. There's no bitterness in me now. I simply don't owe her the version of myself I used to be. Sometimes I pass by a kid in the park sitting alone, drawing something quietly, and I think of that crumpled paper. The one that said, "I'll be better." I wish I could go back and tell that boy the truth. He didn't need to be better. He was already enough. Now I carry nothing in my pocket but a folded square of paper that says exactly that. I am enough. And I believe it. Not loudly, not with fists or fireworks, just quietly, like a steady heartbeat. The funny thing is, peace isn't some dramatic moment. It's a slow unfolding. It's brushing your teeth without bracing for someone to shout. It's cooking dinner and sitting down, not waiting to be asked. Not asking to be seen. Just being. I still think about my family. Of course I do. But I no longer wait for them to love me right. I love me right now. That's the freedom I never knew I needed. and I walked through fire to find it.